Snow drifts softly over the quiet town of Cedar Hollow, where every house seems to sleep beneath a blanket of peace. But not every light that glows in the night tells a story of warmth. Behind one lonely window, a little girl with a broken leg holds her younger brother close, whispering promises into the dark, promises to protect him, to keep him safe, no matter what. Upstairs, their stepmother listens from the shadows, her heart colder than the storm that's about to sweep across the valley. That night, as the wind howls through the trees and the snow buries every sound, something happens that will change their lives, and the entire town, forever. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me your city, your country, down in the comments below. And may your day, no matter how cold or quiet, be touched by warmth, kindness, and a little light to remind you, you are never forgotten, and miracles can begin in the darkest of places. The first snow of December had just begun to fall over the small town of Cedar Hollow, dusting the rooftops and turning every porch light into a halo. The streets were nearly empty. Only the low hum of passing cars broke the stillness. In the northern edge of town, where the woods grew thick and houses sat far apart, a narrow road curved toward a two-story home, whose windows glowed faintly against the gathering dark. That was where Ethan Cole lived, with his two children and his second wife. From the outside, the Cole house looked peaceful, even picturesque. White fences, a mailbox with painted flowers, a wreath on the front door. But beneath its quiet surface, the air felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with winter. Ethan stood by the window that morning, suitcase open on the couch. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looked older when tired. The lines around his eyes had deepened over the years, carved by long hours and long silences. A construction foreman by trade, he had spent most of his adult life working on offshore projects, miles away from shore, from noise, from comfort. Yet no storm at sea ever felt as unpredictable as the one brewing inside his home. He folded his clothes carefully, like a soldier preparing for duty. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he hoped delaying each fold might delay his departure. On the dining table nearby sat Vanessa Cole, his wife of 3 years. She was in her early 30s, beautiful in the way that drew attention without asking for it, tall, slim, and always perfectly composed. Her dark hair was cut into a precise shoulder-length bob that framed a face almost too calm. Beneath that poise, though, lived a sharpness, eyes that noticed everything, lips that smiled more out of habit than warmth. Before marrying Ethan, Vanessa had worked as a regional manager for a furniture company, where she was known for her discipline and efficiency. But since moving into the Cole house, something in her had hardened. She wasn't cruel by nature. She had simply learned early in life that affection was a luxury easily weaponized. Her father had left when she was 12, her mother's bitterness becoming the only language she understood. To Vanessa, control meant safety, and safety meant silence. At the bottom of the stairs, 2 small voices echoed faintly. Lily, Ethan's daughter, was 6 years old, with golden brown hair that curled naturally at the ends and eyes too large for her thin face. Her left leg was bound in a white plaster cast, the result of a fall from a tree 2 months earlier. She was a bright, imaginative child who used stories to fill the silence adults left behind. Her younger brother Noah, only 4, followed her everywhere, a quiet boy with soft dark curls and the wide-eyed trust of someone who hadn't yet learned what fear meant. The 2 children were inseparable, bound by both love and uncertainty. Ethan zipped up his suitcase and turned to Vanessa. "I'll be gone about 2 weeks, maybe less if the weather holds," he said. "Lily needs her bandage changed every few days, and the doctor said no pressure on the leg. Her medicine's in the second drawer, labeled." Vanessa looked up briefly from her phone. "I know, Ethan. You've told me twice." Her tone wasn't hostile, just clipped, like a teacher correcting a student. He hesitated, then smiled faintly, trying to bridge the growing gap between them. "And Noah, he still wakes up at night sometimes. If he does, just read him a story," she finished, finally meeting his gaze. "I remember." The conversation ended there, not with anger, but with the kind of tired civility that hurts more than shouting. Ethan knelt to hug his children before leaving. Lily clung to his neck, whispering, "You'll come back before Christmas, right?" "Of course," he said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "Be good for your mom. I'll call every night." When the door closed behind him, Vanessa didn't wave from the window. She stood still, listening to the car start, to the sound fading down the road. Then she exhaled slowly, shoulders sinking, not in grief, but in relief. She didn't hate Ethan's children, not truly. What she hated was the way they reminded her of everything she'd never had. Laughter without condition, trust without proof. By noon, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. Vanessa began tidying the living room, her motions efficient, mechanical. Toys disappeared into boxes, drawings came down from the refrigerator, photographs were turned face down on the mantel. She found herself humming faintly, the way she used to before she forgot how. Outside, the snow fell heavier, the light fading to gray. That evening, dinner was a strained affair. The children sat opposite Vanessa at the long oak table. Noah spilled a little soup while reaching for bread. Vanessa set her spoon down carefully. "Next time," she said softly, "clean it up right away." "Sorry," Noah mumbled. "No need to be sorry, just learn." Lily helped her brother with the napkin, her small fingers trembling slightly. When she looked up, Vanessa's eyes were on her, a calm, assessing gaze. "You should be resting your leg, Lily. Don't overdo it." "I'm okay," Lily replied. Vanessa smiled faintly, but the curve of her lips didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Then you can help clean up." After dinner, she left them in the living room and went upstairs to her bedroom. For a long while, she sat before the mirror, brushing her hair with slow, deliberate strokes. In the reflection, she looked almost peaceful, like someone rehearsing for a life that didn't quite belong to her. Then her gaze shifted to the photograph on the dresser. Ethan, Lily, and Noah smiling at the park last summer. She turned the frame face down. Meanwhile, in the children's room, Lily tried to change her bandage herself. The plaster around her ankle itched terribly. She remembered what her father had said. Keep it dry, keep it clean. But the roll of gauze slipped from her small hands. Noah fetched it for her, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Dad will come back soon," he said sleepily. "I know," she answered, but her voice was small. Downstairs, the faint chime of a phone rang. Vanessa ignored it at first, then sighed and answered. "Yes, Mother," she said, her tone clipped. "He's gone again." "No, the kids are fine. Yes, it's exhausting." Her mother's voice crackled faintly through the speaker, low and bitter. "You wanted this life, Vanessa. You made your choice." When the call ended, Vanessa stared at the dark window. Snow was falling faster now, swirling in gusts that blurred the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a long, low sound carried by the wind. It made her shiver, though the house was warm. Hours later, she checked on the children. They were asleep, curled close together under one blanket. For a brief moment, something in her softened. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. But when the girl stirred and murmured her father's name, Vanessa's hand froze mid-air. She turned away before the warmth could turn to guilt. The next morning, the cold returned harder. The pipes moaned, and frost crept along the corners of the window panes. Vanessa busied herself with chores, avoiding the sound of laughter from the children's room. By afternoon, her patience thinned. She called them down for lunch, and when they came late, her voice grew sharp. "When I call, you come," she said. "This isn't a playground." Lily looked down. "Sorry, Mom." That word, Mom, should have sounded tender, but instead it stung. Vanessa's reply came out colder than intended. "Don't say that unless you mean it." The day passed in silence. Outside, the storm gathered strength. The wind howled across the yard, and by evening, the world beyond the window had turned into a blur of white. Lily stood at the glass, her crutch propped beside her, watching flakes tumble from the dark sky. "It looks like a snow globe," she whispered. Vanessa, passing behind her, stopped briefly. "Go to bed early," she said. "Your father will call tomorrow." That night, Lily dreamed of the tree she had fallen from, the one by the lake behind the house. In her dream, she climbed it easily, no cast, no fear. When she looked down, Noah was there, waving. But as she reached for the next branch, the bark turned to ice, and she fell again. This time, there was no one to catch her. She woke crying quietly, careful not to wake her brother. Through the thin wall, she heard the faint murmur of Vanessa's voice on the phone downstairs. The tone was calm, steady, almost pleasant. But every few, a second's a word or two, broke through. Can't handle it. Tired. They never stop. Lily clutched her blanket tighter, staring into the dark. The house creaked around her, the cold pressing against the windows. She had a strange feeling, like the snow outside was burying something, not covering it. And so, while the town of Cedar Hollow slept under a blanket of peace, one house on Maple Drive began its quiet descent into something colder than winter. The first snow of December fell like sifted flour over Cedar Hollow, soft at first, then relentless, blanketing roofs, silencing streets, and painting the small Montana town in shades of blue and white. Inside the Cole residence on Maple Drive, warmth was just an illusion, a fire that had long gone out. The air smelled faintly of cold soup and floor polish. Vanessa Cole stood by the kitchen window, tall, slim, her dark auburn hair tied in a tight bun that seemed to pull her face into permanent tension. Her beauty was clinical, the kind that demanded admiration but offered no comfort. She wore a cream cardigan over silk pajamas, her posture rigid even when no one was watching. Once, she had been a department manager at a high-end furniture company, known for her precision and authority. People said she never raised her voice, yet her silence could carve a person in half. Lily sat at the dining table, her right leg encased in a plaster cast, the dull pain pulsing like a heartbeat. She was small for her 6 years, her hair a mess of pale gold strands that caught the light like frost. Across from her, 4-year-old Noah stirred his porridge with a spoon too big for his hand. He had round eyes the color of wet chestnuts, and a perpetual tremor in his voice when he spoke. Vanessa's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, a brief smile flickering. "You two eat quietly," she said, without looking at them. When she left the room, Lily leaned toward her brother. "Don't spill, Noah," she whispered. "She'll be angry again." He nodded, his spoon clinking softly. Upstairs, Vanessa spoke into her phone, her tone light, distant. "Yes, Mother. He's offshore again. 3 weeks, maybe 4. No, I told you I don't enjoy playing nanny, but the money's worth the nuisance." She listened, sighed. "You wouldn't understand. You never had to start over like me." That last sentence lingered in her voice, the quiet confession of a woman who had gambled on marriage to escape loneliness, only to find herself trapped with the ghosts of another woman's children. By noon, the wind howled through the trees. Lily and Noah were cleaning the living room. Vanessa's heels tapped on the hardwood floor behind them, each click a reminder of their place. "Lily," she said, her voice sharp but measured, "did you change your bandage?" "I tried," the girl murmured, "but I ran out of gauze." Vanessa turned, expression unreadable. "It's fine. You'll manage?" There was no malice in her tone, only indifference which hurt more. Lily lowered her eyes and nodded. Outside, a black police SUV slowed down near the house. Officer Caleb Rourke leaned out of the window. Snowflakes dusted his dark hair. He was in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose quiet carried more weight than most people's shouting. His eyes, gray with a trace of blue, carried years of seeing too. Much. Beside him sat Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd with golden tan fur and dark saddle markings. Ranger's ears were sharp, his body lean and disciplined, the reflection of endless training. He had once been a rescue dog, found malnourished near a burned cabin, and had since become Caleb's closest companion, his shadow and his solace. Caleb parked and glanced at the address on the dispatch note. "Noise complaint, 412 Maple Drive," he murmured. Ranger barked once, short and focused, tail flicking. When Caleb knocked, Vanessa opened the door only halfway. "Yes, officer," she said, smiling just enough to be polite. Her lipstick was the color of old wine, her eyes tired but calculating. "Afternoon, ma'am. We received a report from a neighbor, something about shouting or maybe kids crying." Caleb's tone was neutral, professional. Vanessa chuckled softly. "Mrs. Keller again, I suppose. She's a sweet woman, but a little imaginative." From somewhere inside, faint footsteps shuffled. Caleb's gaze flicked past her shoulder, but all he saw was the tidy hallway, the scent of lemon polish. Ranger sniffed the air, then growled low, almost inaudible. Caleb gave a small nod for him to calm down. "Mind if I step in for a moment?" Caleb asked. Vanessa's smile thinned. "I'd rather not. The children are resting. My husband's away, and I'm not comfortable letting strangers in, even officers." He studied her face, a flicker of annoyance too quick to mask. "All right," he said finally. "If you need assistance, we're around." When the cruiser pulled away, Ranger turned his head toward the house, ears twitching, a low whine escaping his throat. Caleb frowned. "Yeah," he muttered. "I feel it too." Inside, the sound of the car faded. Vanessa walked back to the living room. "You two made quite an impression," she said dryly. "You want the neighbors calling police now?" Lily froze, cloth in hand. "We didn't—" "Quiet!" Vanessa's eyes were dark glass. She took the key from her pocket and motioned toward the basement door. "Both of you, downstairs." The basement was cold and damp, its concrete walls cracked and scarred. Old furniture leaned against the walls, and the single light bulb buzzed weakly overhead. Vanessa's voice echoed. "Stay here until I say otherwise." "Please, Mom," Lily pleaded, voice trembling. "Noah's scared." "Then you can comfort him." The lock clicked. Silence pressed in like a weight. For a while, Lily tried to distract her brother by tracing shapes on the dusty floor. "It's just a game," she whispered. "We're camping. Remember how Dad made tents with blankets?" Noah nodded, though his small face crumpled with tears. Hours passed, the bulb flickered, then died. In the dark, Lily imagined her father's voice reading bedtime stories, imagined the sea where he had worked, endless and far. She didn't cry. She had learned that crying made things worse. Meanwhile, across town, Caleb returned to the precinct. The walls were lined with photographs of search and rescue missions, medals, and faded newspaper clippings. His desk was cluttered with case files, each neatly stacked but unopened. On the edge of the desk sat a framed photo, a woman with laughing eyes and a little girl perched on her lap. Both were gone now. Sergeant Mark O'Hara, a burly man in his 50s with a thick beard and a soft spot for bad coffee, leaned against the doorway. "Heard you stop by Maple Drive again?" Caleb looked up. "Yeah, noise complaint. Nothing unusual?" O'Hara grunted. "That's the house with the new wife, right? Vanessa something. Folks say she's particular." Caleb said nothing. Ranger lay under the desk, head on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. "You still think about that night?" O'Hara asked softly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Every day." "Then maybe next time you listen to your gut." That night, the snow turned to ice. In the basement of Maple Drive, Lily counted the drops of water seeping from a pipe, whispering the numbers like prayers. Noah slept against her shoulder, his breathing shallow. Above them, faint footsteps moved, Vanessa pacing, heels clicking like a metronome, marking their confinement. When dawn came, Lily's leg throbbed. She tried to stretch, wincing at the sting that ran up her spine. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, sharp and distant. She pressed her ear to the wall. For a moment, she imagined it was Ranger, the dog she'd once seen walking with the kind-eyed officer last month, when life still had daylight. "Hold on, Noah," she whispered. "Someone will find us. I know it." Above the ceiling, Vanessa stood by the window, watching the same sunrise through frost-painted glass. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman both prisoner and warden of her own bitterness. In the silence that followed, Cedar Hollow exhaled another breath of winter, and the snow kept falling, softly burying every sound, every secret beneath its fragile, merciful white. The storm deepened that night, blanketing Cedar Hollow in a suffocating stillness. Snow piled high against doorsteps, whispering against windows, and the cold crept into every crevice of the old houses that lined Maple Drive. Beneath one of those houses, in a narrow basement reeking of damp and rust, Lily Cole traced her small fingers along the cracked concrete wall. Her hand was raw, the skin pink and torn, but she didn't stop. Each scratch she made was quiet, deliberate, a rhythm of survival. The air tasted of iron and dust. Noah slept beside her, his breath thin and uneven. His cheeks were flushed with fever, but Lily had no thermometer, no way to know how high it ran. All she had was her father's old scarf wrapped around him, the one that still smelled faintly of sea salt and engine oil. A pipe overhead dripped steadily, and she had been collecting the water in a broken plastic cup. Sometimes she would count the drops. 100 meant she could take a sip. Her father had once told her that counting helped him through long shifts at sea. She clung to that memory as if it were a shield. The bandage on her leg had come loose, the skin beneath swollen and dark, but she refused to cry. She remembered what Vanessa had said. Crying doesn't fix broken things. Upstairs, Vanessa moved through the kitchen like a ghost in silk slippers. She poured herself another glass of white wine, her movements mechanical, as though she performed for an invisible audience. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Her reflection in the window startled her. The woman staring back looked older, her features sharper, the hollowness beneath her eyes a bruise of sleepless nights. She reached up to adjust her hair but stopped midway, her hand trembling slightly. For the briefest moment, regret flickered across her face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Outside, the street lamp flickered under the weight of falling snow. A faint figure approached, Mrs. Keller, the elderly widow from next door. She carried a wicker basket covered with a checkered towel. The woman was small and frail, wrapped in a thick knitted coat and scarf. Her white hair, always pinned neatly, peeked from beneath her hat. Mrs. Keller had once been a schoolteacher. Even in retirement, she had a voice that could quiet a classroom and a heart that couldn't ignore a cry for help. She knocked gently on the Coles door. Vanessa opened it just enough for the cold air to slip in. "Oh, Mrs. Keller," she said, her tone polite but strained. "I thought the children might like some gingerbread," Mrs. Keller said with a trembling smile. "They've been so quiet lately. Are they unwell?" Vanessa forced a laugh. "Just tired. They caught a little flu." "I see," Mrs. Keller said softly, her gray eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, tell them I miss hearing their giggles through the fence." "I will," Vanessa replied, though she already planned to toss the cookies once the door shut. As soon as Mrs. Keller turned away, Vanessa's face hardened. She locked the door again and drew the curtain tight, shutting out the world. At the Cedar Hollow precinct, Officer Caleb Rourke sat in his chair, staring at the steam rising from his untouched coffee. Ranger lay under his desk, head resting on his paws, eyes half open. A knock at the door pulled Caleb from his thoughts. It was Officer Dana Whitmore, a young woman in her late 20s, with chestnut hair pulled into a low ponytail, and a determined expression that often softened around children. She was new to the department, but known for her intuition. "You're still thinking about that house, aren't you?" she said. Caleb nodded slightly. "Something's off about that woman." Dana leaned against the doorframe. "You mean Vanessa Cole?" I checked her background. Clean record, married 3 years, no prior complaints. "Records don't show everything," Caleb said quietly. Ranger wouldn't stop staring at that door. "He only does that when there's something wrong," Dana finished for him. She sighed, crossing her arms. "You think we should check again?" "I do," Caleb said. "But not tonight. Roads are iced. We'll go tomorrow." Dana hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You're still the same. Can't ignore a hunch even when the world freezes over." She turned to leave, her boots squeaking on the linoleum. As the night deepened, Lily's fingers continued their desperate work. The old wall was softer than it looked, the plaster crumbling like stale bread. Beneath the surface, she felt cold air, a promise that something lay beyond. Her heart fluttered with cautious hope. She didn't tell Noah yet. She wanted to be sure. By morning, the crack had widened enough for her to peer through. On the other side was darkness, but it smelled faintly of earth and grass. "Outside," she whispered to herself. Noah stirred. "Lily?" His voice was weak. "Shh," she said, brushing his hair back. "Rest. I'll fix everything." That day, Vanessa received a call from Ethan. His voice, distorted by static, carried concern. "How are the kids?" "They're fine," Vanessa said, pacing near the window. "Lily's leg is healing." "I sent another transfer this morning," he continued. "Please make sure she gets her checkup, okay?" "Of course," Vanessa lied smoothly. When the call ended, she glanced toward the locked basement door. The air inside the house felt heavy, thick with the weight of her choices. She poured herself another glass of wine. Afternoon crept in pale and soundless. At the police station, Caleb reviewed dispatch reports while Ranger sat by the window, his ears twitching. Suddenly, the dog stiffened, nose pressed to the glass. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Caleb frowned. "What is it, boy?" Ranger stood, tail straight, alert. He barked once toward the direction of Maple Drive. Caleb grabbed his coat. "All right, let's go." By the time he arrived near the coal house, snow was falling again, heavier this time. The front curtains were drawn, but one upstairs window glowed faintly. Caleb knocked once, twice. No answer. He waited a moment, then turned to leave, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. That was when he noticed Mrs. Keller across the street, watching. "Evening, ma'am," he greeted. "Oh, Officer Rourke," she said, her voice wavering. "It's good to see you. Have you checked on the children? I haven't seen them for days." "They're sick, apparently," Caleb said. Mrs. Keller's brows furrowed. "Sick children still laugh. I haven't heard laughter in that house for weeks." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'll look into it again." That night, the wind howled through Cedar Hollow like a warning. In the basement, the bulb flickered back to life for a moment, casting a thin circle of light. Lily squinted, her small hands trembling as she scraped the last bit of plaster away. She could feel the cold air now, stronger, cleaner. The hole was no bigger than a loaf of bread, but it was enough for her to see the hint of moonlight through the snow. She pressed her lips to Noah's forehead, burning hot. Panic clawed at her chest. "Please, wake up," she whispered. But he didn't respond. She crawled to the dripping pipe, soaked her sleeve, and pressed it to his lips. Above them, Vanessa moved restlessly through the house. She lit a cigarette, a habit she had sworn off years ago, and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. It was past midnight when she heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping beneath the floorboards. She froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Her eyes darkened. Setting down the cigarette, she descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking. When she reached the basement door, she pressed her ear against it. The tapping stopped. Only silence remained. Lily held her breath, hand clamped over Noah's mouth. The door stayed closed. After a moment, Vanessa's heels retreated, her steps slow and deliberate. When the last echo faded, Lily turned back to the wall. "Tomorrow," she whispered, tears mixing with dust. "Tomorrow we'll get out." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of a dog barking in the distance. Ranger's voice, steady and sure, echoing through the snow. The fourth night fell heavy over Cedar Hollow, and the snow came again, thicker, faster, relentless. It pressed against the windows like a living thing, muting every sound and trapping warmth inside the walls of the Cole residence. Beneath those walls, Lily stirred in the dark. The faint hole she had made was wider now, enough for her to feel a steady whisper of winter air brushing her fingers. She couldn't see it, but she could smell the outside, that crisp scent of pine and frozen earth. Her heart thudded faster. Maybe this was the night. Noah lay against her shoulder, his fever worse than before. His small chest rose unevenly, and every breath was a fragile rasp. She tore another strip from her sleeve, dampened it with the drops from the leaking pipe, and pressed it against his lips. "Just a little longer," she whispered, voice trembling. "We'll be free soon." Her leg throbbed each time she shifted. The old plaster had cracked days ago, and the bruising had spread like ink beneath her skin, but she refused to rest. Upstairs, Vanessa sat by the fireplace with the television muted. A bottle of Chardonnay stood half empty beside her. The glow from the fire carved hollows under her cheekbones, revealing the exhaustion behind her perfectly ironed demeanor. On the TV screen, the local news anchor reported about an approaching snowstorm and missing children from another county. Vanessa turned up the volume for a moment, then quickly muted it again. Her eyes flickered toward the locked basement door, then to her reflection in the window, a faint silhouette in the glass. She whispered to herself, "They'll stop crying eventually. They always do." Outside, across the street, Mrs. Keller sat in her small living room, her old cat Nimbus curled up beside her. The cat was thin and gray with cloud-like fur, named after the kind of storm that seemed to haunt the town each winter. Mrs. Keller, wrapped in a faded quilt, stared at the coal house through her window. Something in her gut told her the silence there was wrong. She reached for the phone and called the local station. Cedar Hollow Police Department, evening shift, came the voice of Officer Dana Whitmore. Dana, dear, it's Mrs. Keller, the old woman said. I don't mean to trouble you, but those children next door, I haven't seen them for days. The curtains are always closed, and that woman barely speaks. I can't sleep thinking about it. Dana straightened. Thank you, ma'am. I'll let Officer Rourke know. We've had eyes on that house already. Good, Mrs. Keller replied softly. I trust him. He listens to his dog. When the call ended, Dana turned toward Caleb's desk. He was there, hunched over a report, shadows carving deep lines into his face. Ranger lay beside him, ears twitching in his sleep. Keller called again, Dana said. Caleb looked up. Same house? She says she hasn't. Seen the kids. I think we should go tonight. The storm's bad, but... He was already standing. Gear up. Back in the basement, Lily forced her fingers through the crack in the wall. The edge was sharp, biting into her skin, but the plaster gave way piece by piece. Beyond it, she could see faint moonlight. Her heart pounded. Noah, wake up, she whispered urgently. He stirred weakly, blinking at her. We have to go now. Can you hold on to me? He nodded, too tired to speak. She pulled him onto her back, tightening her father's scarf around both of them to keep him close. With one arm, she held the edge of the hole. With the other, she pushed forward. The air vent on the other side was narrow, barely enough for her to crawl through. The metal scraped her arms and tore her sleeves, but she kept moving. Upstairs, Vanessa was washing her glass when she heard a faint sound. Metal scraping against metal. She froze, her hands dripping. The sound came again, sharper this time. Slowly she walked toward the basement door, the house silent except for the ticking clock and the low hiss of the fire. She turned the knob, listening. Nothing. Then, a muffled clang. Her face twisted, fear flashing behind anger. She grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. The basement light flickered weakly as she shone her beam toward the wall. Dust floated through the air like mist. The hole gaped open near the floor, the faint wind stirring loose paper scraps. Vanessa's breath hitched. Lily, she hissed, come back here. No answer. Only the soft whisper of snow outside. She knelt, peered through the hole, and saw a faint movement, the glint of small fingers disappearing into darkness. No, she whispered, voice breaking into panic. She struck the wall with the flashlight, screaming, You ungrateful little brat! Outside, the storm howled, swallowing her voice. Caleb's cruiser crawled down Maple Drive through thickening snow. The windshield wipers struggled against the ice. Beside him, Ranger sat upright, his eyes locked on the road ahead. Caleb's radio crackled. Dana's voice came through. Visibility's dropping. You sure we shouldn't wait till morning? Something's happening tonight, he said. I can feel it. They reached the end of the street just as Vanessa burst out of her front door, barefoot, hair undone, flashlight swinging wildly. She was shouting, but the words were carried away by the wind. Caleb stepped out, hand resting on his holster. Ma'am, what's going on? Vanessa turned toward him, her face pale under the porch light. They ran. Those little monsters ran. Who? My stepchildren. Caleb froze, then motioned to Ranger. Search. The German shepherd lowered his head, nose cutting through the snow, tail stiff. Within seconds, he caught a scent and bolted toward the backyard, barking sharply. Caleb followed, his boots sinking deep into the snow. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing two small figures near the fence, one dragging the other, leaving a trail of smudged footprints and blood. Hey! Caleb shouted, sprinting forward. Stop! You're safe now! Lily turned at the voice. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, shimmered with fear and confusion. Please don't take us back, she gasped. Her leg gave out, and she fell to her knees, still clutching Noah. Caleb dropped beside her, pulling off his coat and wrapping it around both children. It's okay, he said, voice steady. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you. Behind him, Ranger stood guard, growling low as Vanessa stumbled through the snow toward them. Her expression was wild, mascara streaking down her cheeks. They're lying, she screamed. They're sick. They don't know what they're saying. Dana appeared from the other side of the yard, gun drawn but pointed down. "Ma'am, step back." Vanessa hesitated, her gaze flickering between the officers and the children. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "They made me do it. They wouldn't listen." Caleb looked at her, not with anger, but with something colder. "You locked them in that basement, didn't you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Ranger barked once, sharp and final. By the time the ambulance arrived, the storm had eased. The air was still, the snow reflecting the flashing red lights. Lily was placed on a stretcher, still holding Noah's hand. Caleb stayed beside her until the paramedics loaded them inside. "Will you come with us?" she asked faintly. He nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll be right behind you." When the doors closed, Caleb turned toward the house. The basement door still stood open, the faint smell of damp cement rising from below. He exhaled slowly, then looked at Ranger. "Good work, partner." Ranger pressed his head against Caleb's hand, eyes soft and tired. In the distance, Mrs. Keller watched from her porch, tears glistening on her wrinkled cheeks. She whispered a prayer into the cold night air, one for the children and one for the man who finally listened. The ambulance cut through the storm like a wounded bird, sirens slicing the frozen air as it sped down the lonely highway towards St. Clair Memorial Hospital. Inside, the air was heavy with the sterile scent of antiseptic and cold metal. Lily lay under a thick blanket, her small face pale and hollow. The dried mud on her cheeks looked like bruises in the harsh fluorescent light. Beside her, Noah lay silent, his body shaking with fever, breath shallow and irregular. Every bump on the icy road made him whimper. The paramedic attending to them was Dr. Marissa Houghton, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. Her auburn hair was tied in a low knot, and though fatigue lined her face, her movements were efficient, practiced. She'd worked trauma wards for 20 years, and nothing surprised her anymore, until tonight. "Keep his blanket tight," she told Caleb, who sat beside the stretcher, his uniform soaked, gloves off, eyes fixed on the boy. "He's burning up. We'll need IV fluids as soon as we get there." Caleb nodded, his voice steady but low. "He'll make it. They both will." Ranger lay at his feet, his golden tan fur wet and spiked from the snow, eyes trained on the children. The dog's tail moved slightly each time Lily shifted, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. Caleb glanced down at her, his expression softening. She looked impossibly small, fingers curled around her brother's. "You're safe now," he said, almost to himself. At St. Clair, the emergency wing was chaos. The snowstorm had caused several accidents on the highway, and the staff were stretched thin. The moment the ambulance doors swung open, nurses in blue scrubs rushed forward. The first to approach was Nurse Helen Price, a tall, broad-shouldered woman in her 50s, with a kind but commanding voice. Her hair was graying at the temples, and her glasses constantly slid down her nose. "We've got 2 minors, dehydration, hypothermia, 1 possible infection," Dr. Houghton called out as they transferred the stretchers inside. Helen nodded briskly. "Room 3B and 3C. Get Dr. Patel on standby." Caleb followed, unwilling to leave. The bright white corridors felt endless, their cleanliness suffocating after the dirt and chaos of the night. He paused outside the glass door as doctors swarmed around the children. Through the reflection, he saw himself, his uniform torn, mud smeared on his face, a deep line of exhaustion under his eyes. For a moment, it was like seeing a stranger. "Officer Rourke?" a voice called softly. He turned to see Detective Samuel Danner, a man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and weary eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Samuel had transferred from Helena a year ago after a failed marriage and a burnout case. He was calm, observant, and carried himself with quiet empathy. "Heard the call on the radio. Dispatch said it was a rescue." Caleb nodded. 2 kids, locked in a basement. Stepmother claims they ran away. Samuel's brows furrowed. Ran away? In a snowstorm? Caleb's silence said enough. Inside, Lily stirred. The doctor leaned over her, adjusting her IV. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" he asked gently. Her eyelids fluttered. "Where's Noah?" she murmured. "He's right next door," Caleb said, stepping closer. Her eyes found his, dazed but trusting. You said we were safe, she whispered weakly. And you are, he replied. Nurse Helen smiled faintly as she placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. She'll recover. You did good, officer. Not yet, Caleb murmured. The woman upstairs, Vanessa Cole, she's got answers to give. As the children were stabilized, Vanessa was brought in under police custody. The arresting officer was Deputy Aaron Briggs, a lean man in his early 30s with a freckled face and cautious eyes. He'd been with the force only 3 years and had never handled a child abuse case. Now he guided Vanessa through the waiting area, cuffs glinting under the sterile light. She looked drained, her makeup smeared, hair tangled, but there was no remorse in her eyes, only defiance. When she saw Caleb, she straightened. I did what I had to do, she said, voice trembling but steady. You locked them in a basement, Caleb said, his voice even, cold. They wouldn't stop screaming, she hissed, her composure cracking. You don't know what it's like, being trapped with someone else's ghosts. Caleb's jaw clenched. No, ma'am. But I do know what happens when people stop seeing children as human. Detective Danner stepped forward. That's enough for now. We'll take her in for questioning. He turned to Caleb. Get yourself cleaned up. I'll handle this. Caleb nodded but didn't move. He watched as Vanessa was led away, her heels clicking against the tile floor, an echo that felt too much like the sound of guilt. Ranger followed her with his eyes until she disappeared around the corner, then looked up at Caleb as if to ask, what now? Later that night, Caleb sat in the hospital's small cafeteria. The place was nearly empty, save for a janitor mopping quietly in the corner and a nurse sipping coffee by the vending machine. Caleb cradled his cup, but didn't drink. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window, uniform rumpled, badge tarnished from the cold. He thought of his daughter, Emily. She would have been the same age as Lily if that fire hadn't taken her and her mother 6 years ago. He still remembered the smell of smoke, the sound of her tiny voice calling out from the flames. He hadn't been fast enough then. A soft bark broke his reverie. Ranger sat by his side, eyes patient. Yeah, Caleb whispered, patting his head. We did what we could. Dr. Houghton entered, clipboard in hand. Both kids are stable, she said. The boy's fever is under control, and the girl's leg wound was infected but not severely. She's tougher than she looks. Caleb exhaled. Thank God. The doctor's expression softened. You should go home, officer. Rest. He shook his head. Not yet. As dawn approached, the hospital quieted. Snow outside glowed pink under the first light of morning. In Lily's room, the monitors beeped steadily. She woke to see Caleb dozing in a chair beside her bed, Ranger curled up at his feet. The sight made her lips twitch into the faintest smile. She reached for his hand. He stirred instantly, eyes sharp. Hey, he said softly. Is it morning? She asked. Almost. Did they take her away? Yes, he said. She won't hurt you again. Lily looked toward the window where snowflakes drifted lazily down. Can I see Noah? Soon, Caleb promised. He's just next door. She nodded and closed her eyes again, comforted by his voice. Outside her room, Detective Danner was speaking quietly to Nurse Helen. The father's offshore, right? He asked. Yes, Helen replied. We left a message with the company. He'll probably get it by morning. Good. We'll need his statement when he returns. From down the hall, Ranger lifted his head and gave a single bark, low and steady. Caleb turned toward him, then smiled faintly. What is it, partner? You ready to go home? The dog blinked slowly as if to say, Not until they're safe. As the sun rose over Cedar Hollow, golden light spilled across the hospital floors, chasing away the sterile cold. Caleb stood at the window, watching it touch the snow outside. For the first time in years, the dawn didn't look like a reminder of what he'd lost, but of what he'd saved. And when Nurse Helen passed by, she heard him whisper, almost as if to the morning itself, Maybe this time I got there soon enough. Snow still blanketed Cedar Hollow like a quilt of silence, but inside St. Clair Memorial Hospital, the world was waking. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the corridors, and the smell of strong coffee mingled with antiseptic. Officer Caleb Rourke hadn't left the building since the night of the rescue. He sat by the window in the family lounge, watching pale sunlight spill across the parking lot. His coat was draped over the back of his chair, his badge resting on the table beside a half-empty cup. Ranger slept curled near the radiator, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm, his fur still faintly damp from the storm. The door opened with a squeak, and Detective Samuel Danner stepped in, holding 2 paper cups. "Black or too sweet to drink?" he asked with a half-smile. Caleb managed a tired grin. "At this point, I'd drink diesel." Danner handed him the cup and sat opposite. He looked rough around the edges, beard untrimmed, eyes bloodshot from too many reports. "I went back to Maple Drive this morning," he began. "Forensics already sealed it off. Basement walls are fresh cement. Whoever patched that door meant for it never to open again." Caleb's fingers tightened around the cup. "Did you find anything else?" "A few old toys, broken crutch, fingerprints all over the inside, none on the handle outside." Danner's tone darkened. "It's deliberate, Caleb, not neglect, confinement." Before Caleb could answer, the intercom buzzed overhead. Code white, pediatric ward, room 3C. Both men were on their feet in seconds. Caleb's boots echoed down the hallway as they reached Noah's room. Inside, nurses clustered around the boy's bed. He was convulsing, his small body jerking beneath the sheets. Dr. Marissa Houghton barked orders, calm, efficient. "Push diazepam. Keep the airway clear. Let's stabilize him now." Caleb stood frozen in the doorway until Helen Price, the senior nurse, turned toward him. "It's the fever spike," she said quickly. "He'll pull through. Let us work." He nodded and stepped back. The chaos behind the door felt like thunder muffled by glass. Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing the tension, letting out a soft whine. An hour later, Dr. Houghton emerged, mask pulled down, exhaustion etched into her features. "He's stable," she said quietly. "Dehydration hit harder than we thought, but the seizures have stopped." Caleb exhaled, the air leaving him like a sigh he'd been holding for days. From down the hall came a woman's voice, steady, brisk. "Excuse me, are you the officer who found those children?" She approached before he could answer. Sarah Lennox, a journalist from the Cedar Hollow Gazette, was in her early 30s, tall and wiry, her blonde hair tied in a loose braid. She carried the kind of energy that filled a room, a mixture of curiosity and stubborn compassion. Her coat was dusted with snow, her press badge swinging from her neck. "I've been covering the missing child cases from the northern counties," she said, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Heard what happened last night. I'd like your statement." "Not today," Caleb replied flatly. Sarah hesitated. "People will want to know how you found them, how they survived. It matters." Caleb looked toward the children's rooms. "What matters right now is that they keep surviving." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, slipping her notepad back into her bag. "If you change your mind, I'll be around. For what it's worth, thank you." After she left, Danner joined him again. "She's not wrong," the detective said. "Stories like this don't fade quietly." Caleb sighed. "Let's make sure it ends right then." That afternoon, the police conducted a second sweep of the Cole residence. Danner led the team, while Caleb, against protocol, tagged along. The air inside the house was colder now, emptier. The remnants of Vanessa's life lay scattered, wine glasses, overturned furniture, a cell phone left charging on the counter. The refrigerator hummed faintly, the only sound in the house. "Smells like bleach," Danner muttered. She tried to clean it. In the living room, Ranger sniffed around the baseboards, nose low to the floor. He stopped at the edge of the rug and began to paw lightly. Caleb knelt, lifting the corner. Beneath it was a small latch hidden under the floorboards. Danner crouched beside him, eyes narrowing. "What the hell is this?" They pried it open. A narrow crawl space extended under the kitchen, lined with old boxes and discarded furniture. The air smelled of mildew and iron. Inside one of the boxes lay a stack of journals, Vanessa's handwriting neat, deliberate. Danner flipped through the first one. "Therapy notes," he read aloud. "Control what you can, silence what you can't." Caleb's stomach turned. She planned it, every step. They photographed everything, sealed the evidence. Before leaving, Caleb paused at the basement door, its metal hinges still scarred from where he'd kicked it open. He stared at the darkness below, imagining the small voices that had once echoed there. Ranger stood beside him, tail still, eyes fixed on the same spot. "Come on, boy," Caleb whispered. "We're done here." Back at the hospital, Lily had woken. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Her leg was propped up with clean bandages. She stared at the window, where soft light filtered through the blinds. When she saw Caleb enter, she smiled faintly. "You came back," she said, her voice still fragile. "I said I would," he replied, pulling up a chair. Ranger patted in and rested his head on the side of her bed. Lily reached out to stroke his fur. "He's warm," she murmured. "He's the bravest partner I've got," Caleb said. "Is Noah okay?" "He's resting. Doctor says he'll be just fine." She nodded, relief washing over her face. Then, almost whispering, she asked, "Will my dad come soon?" Caleb hesitated. "He's on his way home. He'll be here before you know it." Lily looked down at her hands. He didn't know. She always smiled when he was home. Her words broke off into silence. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, one of Lily's drawings found in the basement. 2 stick figures and a brown dog under a crooked sun. He placed it on the table. "You drew this?" She nodded. "That's me and Noah. I wanted to draw our mom too, but I don't remember her face." Caleb swallowed hard. "You have a good memory for the things that matter," he said softly. Outside the glass door, Nurse Helen watched the scene quietly, her eyes glistening. She turned when Dr. Houghton approached. "He hasn't left once," Helen whispered. "Maybe he's trying to save more than them," the doctor replied. Later that evening, Detective Danner called with updates. Vanessa confessed partially, said she felt unfit to handle kids who weren't hers, claimed she only meant to discipline them. She'll be arraigned tomorrow. Caleb stood by the window, the phone pressed to his ear. "And Ethan Cole?" "His ship docked an hour ago. He's on his way back from Seattle. Should reach here by morning." When Caleb ended the call, he looked down at Ranger, who was watching him with expectant eyes. "Tomorrow's going to be hard," he murmured, "but maybe it's the start of something right." That night, snow fell again outside the hospital, but this time softer, gentler. Caleb sat by the children's rooms, Ranger asleep at his feet, the hum of machines steady like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to close his eyes, not in grief, but in quiet, hard-earned peace. The courthouse of Cedar Hollow stood at the heart of town, a red brick building crowned by a clock tower whose hands had frozen years ago, as if time itself refused to move forward within those walls. The morning was bitterly cold. Frost clung to every railing, and the breath of those gathered outside rose like smoke into the pale air. The case had drawn nearly every resident, curiosity, anger, pity, all tangled into one restless crowd. Inside, the echoes of footsteps mixed with the distant hum of whispers. Officer Caleb Rourke stood near the entrance, his uniform pressed but weary. He hadn't slept much since the day Vanessa Cole was charged. The trial had moved swiftly, accelerated by the public outcry and the mounting evidence gathered from the house on Maple Drive. Ranger sat obediently beside him, golden fur brushed clean for once, his dark eyes alert but calm. The dog had become something of a local symbol, the town's quiet hero. People stopped to pat his head as they entered, whispering gratitude, though he didn't seem to care. His loyalty began and ended with the man standing next to him. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with tension. Vanessa sat at the defense table, wrists free but posture rigid. She wore a gray suit, her hair smoothed into a neat bun, makeup subtle enough to suggest innocence. Her lawyer, Gregory Lyman, was a small, sharp-featured man in his 50s, with slicked-back hair and a habit of tapping his pen against his jaw when thinking. He had built his reputation defending impossible clients, and there was a quiet arrogance in the way he looked at the jury, as if he believed reason could untangle cruelty. On the prosecution side stood District Attorney Felicia Marsh, a tall woman in her early 40s, known for her unrelenting pursuit of justice. Her dark suit fit like armor, her short black curls framing a face too stern for her age. She had grown up in foster care, a fact that fueled the quiet fury in her work. She had seen too many children swallowed by the system, and she intended not to lose these two to it again. When the judge entered, the murmurs died. Judge Whitmore, a man in his 60s with a silver mustache and eyes like river stones, settled into his seat. "Court is now in session," he said, his voice steady, echoing against the wood-paneled walls. Caleb took a seat behind the prosecution, near the aisle. Across the room, Lily sat beside her father, Ethan Cole, who had returned home 2 days prior. The sea had aged him, sun-creased skin, rough hands, a permanent squint, as if he were still scanning horizons. He wore a simple navy sweater, his fingers fidgeting restlessly in his lap. Beside him, Lily looked small in her light blue dress, her legs still bound in a brace. Her hair was combed neatly, but her eyes betrayed the weight of things no child should have seen. When the clerk called her name, the courtroom held its breath. Ethan hesitated, but Lily squeezed his hand. Before letting go, Caleb rose unconsciously, his instinct to shield her too strong. Ranger's ears perked as the little girl made her way to the stand. Nurse Helen, sitting in the audience, murmured a prayer under her breath. Felicia approached with a gentleness that surprised the room. "Lily," she said softly, "can you tell us what happened that night?" Lily's small hands tightened around the edge of the wooden seat. "She locked us in the basement," she began, voice shaking. "We couldn't see. Noah got sick. I tried to make him feel warm, but the water was cold. She said if we were quiet, we'd get food." Her words fell like stones into still water. No one moved. "Did your stepmother ever tell you why?" Felicia asked. Lily hesitated. "She said we made her sad, that every time we laughed, she remembered something she wanted to forget." Across the room, Vanessa's eyes flickered. It was the first visible crack in her mask. When Felicia was done, Gregory Lyman rose for cross-examination. "Lily," he began, voice smooth, almost fatherly. "Your stepmother sometimes gave you food and clothes, didn't she?" "Yes." "And she read to you once, when you broke your leg?" "Yes." He smiled faintly. "So she cared for you." Lily frowned. "Sometimes people do bad things even when they say they care." The courtroom stirred. Even the judge's mouth twitched, as if suppressing an expression. Lyman cleared his throat and sat down. Ethan was next to testify. His voice trembled at first, but steadied as he spoke. He recounted months of absence, his belief that Vanessa was keeping his family safe while he worked offshore. "She told me Lily's leg was healing, that Noah was shy but doing better. I didn't know," he said, voice breaking. "God help me, I didn't know." During the recess, Caleb stood outside under the courthouse awning, cigarette unlit between his fingers. He hadn't smoked in years, but the habit lingered in muscle memory. Sarah Lennox appeared beside him, coat buttoned up to her chin, notebook tucked under her arm. "You did good," she said quietly. "The town's talking about you like you're some kind of guardian." He gave a short laugh. "I'm not a hero, just late." She studied his face. "Late for what?" He didn't answer. The snow began again, fine and slow, drifting across the courthouse steps. When court resumed, Felicia called one final witness, Dr. Marissa Houghton. She described the children's injuries in clinical detail, the bruising patterns, the dehydration, the infection in Lily's leg. But when she spoke of their recovery, her tone softened. "They survived because someone found them in time," she said, glancing toward Caleb. Lyman tried to frame Vanessa's actions as mental instability. He presented her therapy records, quoting passages about uncontrollable anxiety and fear of attachment. But Felicia cut through his defense with a single line. "Fear does not justify cruelty." By afternoon, the jury deliberated. Vanessa sat motionless, her eyes unfocused, lips parted slightly as if whispering to someone only she could hear. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, there was no outburst, no gasp, only silence, like the town itself was exhaling. Outside, reporters gathered as the sky dimmed toward evening. Sarah caught Caleb's arm. "What happens to them now?" "They heal," he said simply. "The rest is up to time." Lily and Noah left the courthouse, holding their father's hands. Ranger walked beside them, tail low, eyes bright. As they reached the steps, Lily turned to look back at Caleb. For a moment, their eyes met through the snowfall. She smiled, a small, quiet smile, but real. Caleb lifted his hand in a slow wave. Ranger barked once, his voice echoing through the square, sharp and clear. The bell in the old clock tower struck once, the sound carrying through the winter air. It was as if the town itself had decided that, finally, time could move again. Spring arrived quietly in Cedar Hollow. The snow melted from the roofs and slid into the gutters with a faint murmur, and the bare trees began to wear a blush of green once again. The air still held a chill, but it carried a different kind of silence, one that belonged to healing, not fear. A month had passed since the trial. Vanessa Cole was now housed at the Women's Correctional Facility in Billings, her name fading from local headlines, replaced by new stories of renewal. For the first time in years, the Cole house on Maple Drive no longer felt like a wound in the town's conscience. Officer Caleb Rourke parked his truck by the curb that morning, stepping out with Ranger trotting beside him. The once dark windows of the Cole residence were now wide open. The scent of sawdust and paint drifted into the air, mingling with the warmth of spring sunlight. Caleb looked up at the roof, where a new weather vane spun lazily in the breeze, a small metal shepherd dog chasing the wind. Ethan Cole stood in the yard, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. He looked stronger now, though lines of guilt still lingered on his face like scars that refused to fade. "Morning, officer," he said, smiling faintly. "Morning, Ethan," Caleb replied. "You're really doing it, huh?" Ethan nodded toward the house. "Yeah, we're turning it into something better. A place for kids who went through things like mine did." The front yard was filled with people. Volunteers moved in and out of the house, carrying planks, paint cans, and boxes of toys. The community had come together faster than anyone expected. Among them was Caroline Moore, a woman in her late 50s who ran the local youth center. She was tall and soft-spoken, her silver hair tied in a loose braid that fell over her flannel shirt. Once a school counselor, she had lost her only son to an overdose years before, and since dedicated her life to helping children rebuild theirs. "We'll call it the Haven Room," she said, handing Ethan a clipboard. "Every town needs a door that opens to light." Caleb smiled at that. He turned toward Ranger, who was busy sniffing a box of donated blankets. "You hear that, boy? Light suits you better than snow." The dog wagged his tail, nose still buried in the box. Inside, the transformation was astonishing. The basement, once a prison of concrete and fear, was now being rebuilt as a playroom. The walls were freshly painted in bright yellows and soft blues, the single bulb replaced with hanging lamps shaped like stars. A carpenter named Miguel Alvarez, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a thick accent, was installing a wooden bookshelf along the far wall. "You wouldn't believe this was the same place," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "When I took the first swing at that cement, I swear it felt like breaking a curse." Caleb nodded. "Maybe you did." Upstairs, Lily sat on the couch, her crutches resting. Beside her, her leg brace was lighter now, and her face no longer looked hollow. Noah was on the floor beside her, stacking toy blocks into precarious towers. He laughed when they toppled, the sound filling the house like sunlight through dust. Caroline was helping them paint handprints on a wide wooden door that would later hang at the entrance to the basement. Each print was a different color, small and imperfect. "What color do you want yours to be?" Caroline asked Lily. "Blue," Lily said, "like the sky when it's clean." Caleb stood at the doorway, watching. For a moment, he saw not the broken basement or the courtrooms or the long nights of grief. He saw only a child smiling. Ranger padded over and sat by Lily's feet. She reached down, pressing her small palm against his head. "You were the first one who heard me," she said softly. Ranger licked her fingers, tail sweeping slowly across the floor. Outside, Sarah Lennox was interviewing volunteers for the Cedar Hollow Gazette. She wore jeans, boots, and her usual reporter's jacket, creased, ink-stained, and stubbornly unglamorous. Her eyes, usually sharp and relentless, were softer today. When she spotted Caleb on the porch, she waved. "I never thought I'd see the day this house smiled," she said. "It's strange, isn't it?" he replied. "A place that used to swallow light is now giving it back." Sarah jotted that down, smiling faintly. "Mind if I quote you on that?" "Only if you spell my name right this time." She laughed, a clear, genuine sound. "You're impossible, Rourke." Her article later that week would read, "From Shadows to Shelter, the house that chose to heal." It would include a photo of Lily and Noah in the yard, Ranger at their side, and the new sign above the door. The Haven Room, for every child who believed in mourning. By late afternoon, the volunteers gathered in front of the house for a small dedication. The town mayor, Harold Whitby, a round man with a weathered face and a voice that always seemed one breath away from laughter, stood before the crowd. "What happened in this house could have broken us," he said, "but instead, it reminded us what we're meant to be, a community that doesn't turn away." He gestured toward Lily, who stood holding Ethan's hand, her other hand resting on Ranger's neck. "This little girl taught us something we all forget," the mayor continued. "That courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a whisper that refuses to stop." Applause rose, scattered at first, then swelling until even the air seemed to hum with it. Caleb found himself clapping too, though his throat tightened unexpectedly. He wasn't used to applause, not for him, not for anything. Ranger barked once, breaking the moment, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Afterward, Ethan approached Caleb. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly, "for saving them, for not walking away." "You don't have to," Caleb replied. "Just take care of them. That's thanks enough." Ethan hesitated, then offered his hand. Caleb shook it firmly. "You're welcome here any time," Ethan said. So is he. He nodded at Ranger, who was currently rolling on his back near a group of children, tail thumping wildly as they laughed and petted him. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lily sat on the porch steps beside Caleb, a cup of cocoa in her hands. "It's strange," she said, looking at the horizon. "The world feels big again." "It is big," he replied. "It always was. You just had to find your door." She looked up at him curiously. "Did you find yours?" Caleb smiled, his gaze drifting toward the house, where warm light spilled from the windows. "Yeah," he said. "I think I just did." As dusk settled, the volunteers began to leave. The last rays of sunlight caught the paint on the new door, a swirl of small handprints forming the shape of a sun. On it, a carved wooden plaque read, "The door once locked in darkness, now opens to light." Caleb ran his hand across the smooth surface, feeling the warmth still clinging to the wood. Ranger leaned against his leg, tail brushing gently against his boot. Together, they stood for a long moment in silence, watching the porch light flicker on. For the first time since the fire that had taken his own family years ago, Caleb felt something he had forgotten the shape of. Peace, quiet and steady, like the breath before a prayer. And when Lily's laughter echoed behind him, soft and bright, he realized the town itself had begun to breathe again. Summer came gently to Cedar Hollow, soft as a prayer. The hills bloomed with wildflowers, the river ran clear again, and children's laughter echoed where silence once ruled. A year had passed since the house on Maple Drive reopened as the Haven Room. The building no longer carried the chill of memory. It smelled of paint, sunlight, and new beginnings. Each wall told a story not of what had been lost, but of what had survived. Officer Caleb Rourke stood outside that morning, coffee in hand, watching a group of children plant marigolds by the fence. Ranger sat beside him, fur shimmering golden under the light, now showing the faint grays of age around his muzzle. The old shepherd was slower these days, but still alert, still proud. A soldier who had traded war for peace. Caleb reached down, rubbing the dog's neck. "You've earned the rest, old boy." Ranger's tail thumped once against the porch, his eyes soft and knowing. Inside, Ethan Cole was helping hang a framed photo in the main hallway, a picture taken at the ribbon-cutting ceremony the year before. His daughter Lily stood on one side of him, Noah on the other, both smiling. In the corner of the picture, Ranger's ears poked up from the frame. "I still can't believe this place used to be ours," Ethan said, stepping back to admire the photo. His voice had steadied over the months, deeper now, but gentler. He wore a flannel shirt with rolled sleeves, his once weary face relaxed. "Sometimes I think about leaving town, starting over somewhere new, but then I look at them," he gestured to the children running past the window, "and I realize starting over doesn't mean leaving, it means staying to rebuild." From the back of the hall came Caroline Moore, her hair pulled into a tidy bun, now streaked with more silver. She carried a box of new books under her arm, her steps brisk despite her age. "Don't you dare move that picture," she said, setting the box down with a huff. It's perfect right where it is. Her kindness had become the quiet heartbeat of the haven. She managed every detail, from weekly art classes to the garden Lily tended. The kids asked if we could name the garden today, she added. They've narrowed it down to two, Sunrise Patch or Ranger's Yard. Caleb chuckled. I think we both know which one's going to win. That afternoon, a small celebration filled the front lawn. The Haven's one-year anniversary had drawn a small crowd, town residents, donors, and a few new families who'd joined the program. The air buzzed with laughter, the scent of grilled corn and lemonade drifting through the breeze. Sarah Lennox arrived with her camera slung around her neck, notebook tucked under one arm. She'd traded her old press badge for freelance work, now writing stories about resilience and community. She wore a white blouse and faded jeans, her hair shorter, wind-tousled. Her smile came easier these days. You've outdone yourself, Rourke, she said, snapping a photo of the crowd. Don't look at me, Caleb replied, half smiling. I just show up when the coffee's hot. Sarah laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Still the modest hero, huh? That article I wrote last year, The House That Chose to Heal, ended up being one of the Gazette's most read pieces. I'm working on a follow-up. About what? Caleb asked. She looked around at the children chasing bubbles across the yard. About what happens after heroes walk away, or when they stay. Before Caleb could respond, a loud cheer erupted by the garden. Lily stood there, holding a small wooden sign she had painted herself. Her leg had healed almost completely now, though she still favored her right side slightly. The sign read in bright blue letters, Ranger's Yard. Noah was at her side, his face beaming, his hands smeared with dirt. Everyone clapped. Caroline pretended to protest. So much for democracy, but her eyes were wet. Ethan lifted Noah onto his shoulders, and the boy waved at the crowd as though greeting the whole world. Ranger barked once, deep and proud, his tail sweeping the grass. Later in the day, as the sun began to dip behind the oaks, the crowd thinned, leaving only a handful of volunteers cleaning up the tables. Caleb sat on the porch steps, the sky glowing a warm amber. Sarah joined him, 2 mugs of lemonade in hand. You ever think about leaving the force? She asked quietly. He considered the question. Sometimes. I've seen enough darkness to last a lifetime. But lately, he gestured toward the house. This place reminds me why I joined in the first place, to protect what deserves a chance. She nodded. You could teach that to others. Maybe that's the next story. Before he could reply, Lily came bounding toward them, her hair flying loose, a small object clutched in her hands. Officer Rourke, she called breathlessly. She stopped before him and opened her palms. Inside lay a small brass key, old and worn, tied with a blue ribbon. I found it when we were planting flowers. Dad said it was the key to the old basement door. We thought maybe you should have it. Caleb took the key gently, the metal cool against his skin. Thank you, Lily, he said softly. It belongs to all of you now. She shook her head. No, you opened it first. The simplicity of her words hit him harder than he expected. He slipped the key into his pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. As evening deepened, strings of lanterns flickered to life around the porch. Ethan strummed an old guitar while Caroline hummed along, her voice low and steady. Children sat in clusters, eating slices of pie. Ranger sprawled among them like a tired guardian. Sarah snapped photos between songs, capturing smiles and unguarded joy. When darkness settled, Caleb stood and addressed the small crowd. A year ago, this place was a wound, he began, voice quiet but carrying. Now it's a door, one that never closes. You all built that, not with money or hammers, but with courage, with love. He paused, glancing at Ethan, then at Lily and Noah. And if you ever forget what light feels like, just remember what it sounds like when a child laughs. The crowd applauded, soft and sincere. Sarah lowered her camera, blinking away tears. Later, when most had gone home, Caleb lingered in the garden. Fireflies winked between the flowers, their glow faint but steady. Ranger sat beside him, head resting on his knee. You did good, partner, Caleb murmured. The dog's ears flicked, eyes half closed. Footsteps approached, Ethan carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Can't sleep either? He asked, offering one. Never could when it's too quiet, Caleb admitted. They stood together for a while, watching the house bathed in lantern light. Through the window, they could see Lily and Noah curled up on the couch, Caroline reading them a story. The sound of her voice drifted faintly through the open window, a tale about lost travelers finding their way home. Ethan broke the silence. You ever think maybe we don't find light, it finds us? Caleb smiled faintly. Maybe, but someone's got to hold the door open for it. As the night deepened, a gentle wind rustled the trees. The small wooden sign at the edge of the yard, Ranger's Yard, creaked softly but didn't fall. Its painted letters gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a promise etched into wood and time. And when Caleb finally turned to leave, Ranger rose and followed, step for step, as he always had. Behind them, the porch light glowed steady, a light that would never again go out. Sometimes God's greatest miracles are not loud or shining. They come quietly, through the hands that reach out in compassion, through the hearts that refuse to give up on love. In the story of Cedar Hollow, we saw how light can return even to the coldest home, and how forgiveness can turn pain into purpose. In our everyday lives, there are still many Lily and Noahs, souls who just need someone to listen, to care, to believe that kindness still exists. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles are real, and that no darkness lasts forever. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, hope, and healing. Type Amen in the comments if you believe that God still works His miracles through ordinary people every single day. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. So, together we can keep spreading faith, light, and love to every corner of the world.